is Legacy Bound. Make sure you hit that like, subscribe, notification button. I'm Michael Adams. My panelist tonight from the Gridiron Battle Zone, Brian King. We're joined here by a special guest for a career interview. Played 12 years in the NHL as a defenseman, which, as being a defenseman, I love and respect that. He was the 10th overall pick in the 87 entry draft by the New York Rangers. He did play with those Rangers twice, actually. North Stars, Sharks, Coyotes, the Blackhawks, and the Predators. So we have Jayson More here, and Jayson has been involved in trades that have included players Brian Hayward, Marty McSorley, and Chad Kilger. So three really nice players there. Jayson, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So as I said, career interview, and we're going to jump right into it. We'll start with Brian tonight.
All right, Jayson. So you grew up in Source, Manitoba, played youth hockey there, and also played for the Brandon Wheat Kings junior hockey club, who are based in that same province. This ultimately earned you a spot in the Manitoba Hockey Hall of Fame. So what were those early years in Manitoba like for you, and what did the Hall of Fame honor mean to you?
Well, that's growing up, you have a passion for the game, and you don't really know where your future is going to be. Every kid probably dreams of playing, at a higher level, whether that's maybe the Western Hockey League or the NHL someday. So those years were probably, pretty family oriented. Parents were taking you to games. I had an older brother and a younger sister, so it was a split every weekend, whether mom and dad were taking one of us one direction or the other. I left home when I was 14. I went to Athol Murray College of Notre Dame, and I was a Hound there for 1 year before I went on to play in the Western Hockey League.
So you were playing for then it was the Minnesota North Stars, obviously the Dallas Stars today, but you were playing for the Minnesota North Stars. They trade you to the Montreal Canadiens. You don't appear in a game for Montreal, and they decide not to protect you. So that takes us into the 1991 expansion draft. The San Jose Sharks, welcome to the NHL. You're picked second overall in that expansion draft. How did that process work? Did you know that you were going to be taken by the Sharks? And what was the experience of, really for the first time in your career dealing with an expansion draft?
Well, it was definitely, if you want to back up to when I was drafted by the New York Rangers, the head scout, director of scouting, was a fellow by the name of Jack Ferreira. And Jack drafted me in New York with the Rangers. And then the following year, took the general manager job with the Minnesota North Stars. So I was shortly after he took the job. The Rangers ended up having some serious injuries at center, and I was the guy that was traded shortly after that for Dave Archibald, who was a centerman that was drafted the same year I was from the Minnesota North Stars. So Dave and I traded places. I went to Minnesota with Jack, and I was 19 at the time. I got my feet wet. I got a few games in with the North Stars that year, spent the year in the minors. But then ultimately, the Gunn brothers were offered a expansion franchise. Rather than moving the Minnesota North Stars, the NHL granted them a franchise in San Jose. So part of the deal was a lot of the young guys were going to be leaving the Minnesota North Stars organization for San Jose. And when that happened, the new general manager in Minnesota at the time was Bobby Clark. He started trading a lot of the young guys. I happened to be a guy that went to Montreal, went right to the minors in Fredericton, finished the season off there. And then it was just a matter of waiting to see if the Sharks were going to take me, because my old ace in the hole, I guess, Jack Ferreira, became the GM of the San Jose Sharks, with the Gunn brothers, who were the owners of the North Stars, got the expansion franchise in San Jose, and Jack went with them there. So I was selected to the Sharks. It was an exciting time, but it was exciting because I was very young, but a little bit naive because, we were the first expansion team that really started from nothing for many years. You know, the expansion of the WHA, bringing the Jets, the Whalers, Oilers, Nordique in. They were already existing franchises in the WHA. When we went to San Jose, we played out of the Cow Palace. They didn't even have a front office for the Sharks, for the management, for the organization, for the staff. So they really made do for the first 2 years in San Jose with pretty much nothing there.
So let's build off of that a little bit. How did the people of San Jose at the beginning, take to the Sharks? And after a very, very rough first season of that Sharks team, what was the fans' reactions? Were they still excited going forward, or were they kind of realizing this is going to be a process?
They were the best fans that any sports franchise could have asked for. Expansion back in those days is not like expansion is currently. You know, the guys that were left unprotected were mostly minor league guys, played in the NHL for a few games. They were third, fourth liner guys. So we had a real good character team, just a lot of gritty guys that we were just short on talent. As far as the fan base goes, it was amazing. It didn't matter win or lose. If you come out and competed and played hard, the fans loved it. They were just dying to have a hockey franchise there. And even in those early years in the Cow Palace, people drove, from all over California to get to those games. And it was 2 years of, well, it was not the best of times in the Cow Palace. I don't know if you ever watched any games from there, but it was not made, certainly not made for hockey. There were some pretty long nights in the Cow Palace anyways, and it smelled like a rodeo all the time.
We know what that's like living down here in Tampa, because the Lightning started on the Florida Fairgrounds and the carnival was outside. So, the elephants would be pooping out there where you get changed, where the players get changed. So it was crazy.
I do remember those early first few games in Tampa. Yeah. And then they moved into the big stadium there.
The baseball arena. Yeah.
Yeah. That was an amazing time.
Yeah. So let's move on here to 93, 94. It didn't take long for the Sharks to get into the playoffs, and you guys pull off what is arguably one of the greatest playoff upsets of all time. You knock out the Detroit Red Wings, Game 7, big goal by Jamie Baker to win that series. He's been on this show. There's a little plug. So tell us about that series and the very strong defensive system put in by Kevin Constantine.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, we were a little short on talent those early years, and by year 3 we had moved into the new arena down in San Jose and had an incredible fan base. And Kevin came in and established he said, hey, we're not gonna win games by outscoring a lot of teams. We've got to play defense first. And that's kind of when my career sort of took I finally was put into a role. I'd been sort of an offensive guy somewhat throughout junior and my early pro career. But when that season, I was paired with Sean Cronin, who was my defense partner, and Jamie Baker was our, his line was we played as a 5-man unit, very much like the Russian 5 system that Scotty Bowman, after Igor Larionov went from San Jose to Detroit, established. So we stayed as a 5-man unit all year long, and we were put into a defensive role. And Kevin called us in at the start of this season and said, guys, I don't care if you get a goal all season, but every time the other team is, one of their top lines are on the ice, you guys are going to be on the ice. You're going to be checking them. So right away with that mentality, we took that defensive first approach and took a lot of pride in shutting the other team's top lines down, which, to start that season, we started out 0-8-1. Didn't look very promising. And as we turned things around, we got to the All-Star break. From the All-Star break to the end of the season, we were the best team in the NHL, best record. End up getting into the playoffs, playing Detroit Red Wings in the first round, who had just set a it was either a franchise record for most points that season, or an NHL record. But
it was the NHL record. Yeah.
Yeah, they were pretty stacked, and we were able to beat them. That was when the NHL went. They went 2 games, 3 games, and 2 games. So your 7-game series was not. It didn't go 1-1. It was a 2-3-2 series. So we ended up sneaking one out in Detroit to start that playoff, and kind of got them back on their heels. Took advantage of their young goaltending, their weak goaltending that kind of collapsed on them. And then Bakes gets that big goal in Game 7 in Detroit. Probably one of the greatest memories of my time, because we were the serious underdog of that series.
But Jayson, you were dealt to the Phoenix Coyotes midway through their inaugural season in 96, 97. What was the atmosphere like in that city for hockey at that point? And you guys had a strong run in March and April. You were able to make the playoffs that year and nearly knocked off the Ducks. So what was the feeling in the locker room down the stretch?
That was another great organization that had just moved from Winnipeg. We had a number of real good players there: Tocchet, Roenick, Tkachuk, Numanen, Habibulin in net, and we were a pretty solid team. The fan base was excellent in Phoenix. We played right downtown, so we were able to draw from the entire greater Phoenix area, rather than, the way it's situated now. It's such a long drive or was a long drive for the fans to get to games. And that's why things ultimately didn't, I think, work out in Phoenix as well as they should have the last few years. So yeah, we had a real solid team, played with some great character guys there, and had a lot of fun.
So in June of 1998, you signed with the expansion Nashville Predators, and you were getting a decent chunk of ice time, but unfortunately, if I understand correctly, you suffered a career-ending concussion injury in December of that year. So that had to be absolutely devastating. So you are the perfect person to ask this question. When a player is told by medical professionals that that's it, that it's over, how are they able to cope with that news, and what can they do to sort of fill that void?
Yeah, that's a good question, because in those days there was no concussion protocol put in place. It was, you got your bell rung, and I had never really known what a bad concussion was prior. I felt a little woozy for a day or two, and then you kind of bounce back, and you really never wanted to take yourself out of the lineup. So in my situation, yes, I had just nicely signed here in Nashville, excited to be part of an expansion growth, to help lay that foundation, especially in a place like Nashville. And yeah, I got just kind of an innocent little hit, and just collided with a player, caught me on the jaw, and just a little mid-ice collision. And I remember when it happened, everything went black. I couldn't see the play, but I could hear the fans. And we were in the defensive zone at the time it happened, and I can remember seeing spots and just thinking, if I could get back to the front of the net, I'll have my man. If I could just tie somebody up, they won't score a goal, and I'll get off here. But I could not see anything. All I could hear was the fans, and I got myself back to the bench, and was had the dry heaves and all the things that go along with the concussion. Played a little bit longer, and then the trainer finally took me out, but spent the night in the hospital, came back 2 days later, played against Montreal. Probably shouldn't have been cleared to play, but in those days, that's just what you did. They said, well, can you go or not? And most guys were like, oh yeah, put me in, I'm fine. First shift against Montreal, I got another dinger, and never in my I never gotten hit like in my career as hard as I did in those first couple periods against Montreal. And finally the trainer said, "You got to come out. You don't even know where you are." So I argued with him for a minute on the bench, and finally he said, "No, you're out." So that was it. Didn't ever think at the time it was going to be the end. But as things went on, I just didn't get any better. In fact, I got progressively worse as far as the symptoms. The noise and the motion of just having kids around in the house was hard to take. So there was about 2 years where I was sick to my stomach every morning, and nobody really had to tell me, "Hey, your career is over. You can't come back." I pretty much knew just from the way I was feeling, just to get up and try to function daily was a real chore. So it took a long time to get over, a number of years, and now fortunately they can recognize some of these issues the guys are having and try to cut them off early, stem that coming back and playing when you probably shouldn't be playing.
Right, right. Well, getting back to you were talking about the defensive mentality. I mean, throughout your hockey career, you were often utilized as a penalty killing blue liner. And now, not every player is really cut out to be a penalty killer. So, could you describe the skills and sort of the mentality that one needs to possess in order to really excel in that role?
Well, it's sometimes not as rewarding, I guess, as being, on the offensive side of things. Players don't always get the recognition of shutting down the opposing team's top offensive guys. But in our situation, and I'd mentioned previously that, with guys like Jamie Baker and myself, Sean Cronin, that was really our job. And we were identified as, "Hey, you guys are going to be going out and penalty killing, shutting down the top line," and it just gave us a focus. So when you're penalty killing, you have to be able to understand, the details, I guess, of what it takes to be a good penalty killer, taking away the passing lanes. It's a lot of times it's giving it up and blocking shots, helping each other out. When one guy gets beat, you're the last guy back. You're going to have to either block that shot or figure out a way how to shut the other team down. So, it was a rewarding time. A lot of times I changed my equipment actually that season, different shin pads. I got longer pants because I was going to be killing more penalties and blocking more shots. So I padded up a lot more than I used to in the earlier years.
So we'll get you out with this. I know you'd mentioned to me earlier before we started that you've been in broadcasting for a little while. So this is kind of, as a broadcaster, your thoughts. I know you're still a Sharks fan. Your family's still a Sharks fan. Just your thoughts on what might have been the biggest trade this past offseason that we've seen since Patrick Wall getting moved, the Erik Karlsson trade. What did you think of the Sharks' return? A lot of the media out there didn't think the Sharks did as well as they should have in that trade. And what can the Sharks do to turn their franchise around? They're kind of in a rough spot right now.
Well, they went in the full rebuild mode, and Karlsson spending last season, he had a great year. I was surprised that nothing happened sometime throughout the year of the season. I don't know. They got what they could for him at the time. I thought they might have done a little bit better towards the trade deadline of last season. But they're in the full rebuild mode in San Jose. It's somewhat disappointing, to see that the arena is only about a third full a lot of nights. But I understand that. I get it. That's why a lot of teams don't ever want to go back and do a full rebuild. It's, you can tweak things like they're doing in Nashville here somewhat, but to do a full rebuild, that's a big commitment. There's a lot of years that can be some pretty lean years. Hopefully the Sharks can come out of it. They look like that they're starting to trend that direction. They had a tough start here this year, but they've been competitive in a lot of games, and they're going to have some high draft picks here that they can compile over the last year, 2, 3 years. A little bit like Anaheim is doing. We played Anaheim here last night in Nashville, and that's a pretty promising young organization just because of the high draft picks that they've got. The Sharks are a little bit in the same situation. They're going to have a few guys that are your top 5 or 6 picks here now for a couple of years in a row, and they'll get out of it. They'll just continue to just keep building and continue that game plan that they have in place, and eventually they'll be competitive again. But yeah, it's tough, and especially in this day and age when the NHL, you're competing with so many other different things. Your sports market is huge in the Bay Area, and then nowadays kids just have so many other things to do. But so yeah, it'll hopefully those fans come back and they can be competitive here in the near future.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jayson More, for joining us. We appreciate you coming on.
Great. I had a lot of fun. Thanks, guys, for having me.
I'll remind everybody, hit that like, subscribe, notification button. We'll see y'all next time. Thank you for watching. Have a great night.